Hey everyone, welcome to Hands on Books. I'm about to buy a lot of books online, and I told myself I shouldn't until I at least do an episode on the books I bought for my last vacation to New Mexico. So that's what this video is going to be. I'm just going to run through all the cool stuff I got. So I'm going to start with the books from Books of Interest in Santa Fe, starting with Sparta's Bitter Victories. Politics and Diplomacy in the Corinthian War by Charles D. Hamilton. And I think I'll just read, a little bit of the cover, maybe some from the first page, and keep moving. This book treats Greek politics, diplomacy, and interstate relations following the end of the Peloponnesian War in 404 BC to the King's Peace in 386. Pointing up the larger significance of this epoch in Greek history, it examines the reasons why the Corinthian War was fought as it was, and why it ended as it did. No other recent scholarly work covers the same crucial period in such detail. Professor Hamilton shows that the foreign policy of each Greek state was deeply influenced by the outcome of internal struggles between rival factions pursuing different objectives. Although his focus is on politics, he analyzes and assesses the effects of the Peloponnesian War on Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, and Persia in social and economic as well as political terms. He accounts for the Greeks' failure to solve problems of autonomy and security after the war, and he puts in perspective some of the developments in the 4th century that eventually led to the Macedonian conquest. The book is the result of exhaustive study of the ancient evidence and of works by modern scholars. Throughout the narrative, Professor Hamilton addresses questions of historiography and methodology. His investigation of the era, the approach that he takes, and the conclusions he draws represent a departure from traditional views of a critically important period in both Greek and early European history. And Charles D. Hamilton was professor of history at San Diego University. And I love these old books from before when the covers had barcodes on them. And I'm about 200 pages into this, and it's great. It's just really interesting. I never knew about that period right after the Peloponnesian War. Athens loses, Sparta wins, but then Sparta just blows it. And I never understood why. So this is a really fun book. I'll just read the first page. Sparta was by far the most powerful and important state in Greece at the conclusion of the Peloponnesian War, and she maintained this position for more than a quarter of a century, until her defeat at the Battle of Leuctra in 371. In view of Sparta's military and political predominance during this period, her policy provides the key to understanding the events of Greek history after 404. Surprisingly, Spartan history in the decade from 404 to 395 has not yet been treated adequately and comprehensively. Several recent studies, while elucidating some of the problems, have been limited in scope, and the general histories provide accounts that are too summary to be of much help. The picture of Spartan history we can recover is indeed startling. It is not that of the stable polity, blessed with good government and a sound constitution, that Thucydides described. Rather, internal political strife, characterized by political trials, banishment, and revolutionary plots, was a frequent occurrence. While foreign policy vacillated between isolationism and active intervention in the affairs of other states. Although the details are sometimes hazy, it is clear that the state was subject to severe pressures that threatened to rend the fabric of the Lycurgan constitution. The city, for example, was racked by grave internal dissension, resulting in at least 6 political trials and 3 sentences of exile, one of them against a Spartan king. 2 independent schemes to revolutionize the constitution were formed and barely failed of success, while a third was later contemplated, and religion, in the form of attempts to obtain oracular assistance to solve social and political problems, was resorted to by unscrupulous cynics and sincere believers alike. In external relations, Sparta was torn among several rival and mutually inconsistent views of the role she ought to play in diplomacy and international affairs, and she became involved in 3 major military undertakings and at least as many of lesser importance. In short, Sparta found herself beset by numerous challenges and demands that caused factionalism and turmoil in the state and upset the fundamental structure of economic, social, and political life. Yet, In spite of the obvious stress and strain and the resultant transformations which the Peloponnesian War produced in Sparta, one still finds the following judgment in an authoritative and widely read work. Quote, "The reaction of Sparta's foreign conquests upon her domestic affairs was on the whole singularly small. Her conservatism made her all but impervious to those influences which transformed Rome after the Punic and Macedonian wars." End quote. This book has been written in part to modify such a view. So yeah, I definitely recommend this book if you can get a hold of a copy. It's not too expensive, but out of print. And next, we've got The Voyage and the Messenger, Iran and Philosophy by Henry Corbin. This work, incorporating previously unpublished interviews and articles, retraces the quest of Henry Corbin into the imaginal realm of the unseen real, the domain of angels and numinous beings. A study of religious philosophy, an exploration of visionary faith, these pages offer a superb meditation on the great themes of Perso-Islamic mysticism, the Sufi theory of knowledge, the voyage within the soul, le rituel de la coupe, and an illuminating glimpse into the philosophic universes of Sohrawardi, Ibn Arabī, and Mullah Sarda Shirazi. Henry Corbin died in 1978. He was professor of Islamic religion at the Sorbonne and director of the Department of Iranic Studies at the Institut Franco-Iranien in Tehran. His wide-ranging work included the first translations of Heidegger into French, studies in Swedenborg and Bohm, writings on the Grail and angelology, and definitive translations of and commentary on Persian, Islamic/Sufi texts. He introduced such seminal terms as the imaginal realm, Tawil, and theophany into Western psycho-spiritual thought. His published works include Creative Imagination, the Sufism of Ibn Arabī, Avicenna and the Visionary Recital, and The Man of Light in Iranian Sufism. So let's just read a page of it. Part 1, Religious History. Iranian Studies and Comparative Religion. This is an unpublished conference lecture delivered at the Literary Faculty of the University of Tehran, May 13, 1948. I am honored to introduce the basic theme of comparative religious studies into the setting of our work at the Institute of Iranology. At the same time, I am struck by the formidable complexity of this task. The overall set of problems and research questions which now surround the concept of this discipline originated about 150 years ago in a purely Western philosophical context. That situation itself was already the ripe result of experiences and crises extending over several centuries. If we were to seek out the deepest roots of this situation, assuming that mere historical investigation is capable of plumbing such mysteries, we would at the very least have to consider the development of the Western religious mentality since the great crisis of the 16th century, a time which was overshadowed by the events of the Renaissance and the Reformation. Only this could allow us to understand the emotionally charged climate in which religious studies were often carried out during the 19th century. There is no doubt that in many cases this was because too many of the participants were interested only in a negative result. At the same time, this brings us into direct contact with the most delicate issue which arises whenever anyone attempts to formulate the contrast between East and West, perhaps most often assuming an Occident which has entirely developed into a certain pattern, as well as the image of an Orient which still preserves a certain mode of being. The contrast thereby arrived at has been the occasion for some legitimate soul-searching, yet it has also provided a pretext for some rather hasty comparisons. Be that as it may, we are forewarned of the gravity of what is at stake in these studies. The issues they raise touch the most serious questions that human beings have asked or will ask about themselves, dealing with their absolute inmost nature. These questions demand a grasp of the answers which different generations of human beings have proposed over the centuries, expressed in the configurations of symbols and texts which they have transmitted to us, or which we must learn anew. Love that. I haven't really cracked it yet. Next, The Essential Kabbalah, The Heart of Jewish Mysticism by Daniel C. Matt. And I recognize his name because he's a really important scholar in this field. I think he translated the Zohar. His is like the authoritative translation. For hundreds of years, the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah has not been available for general readership. Now, Daniel Matt, an internationally respected authority on Jewish mysticism, has gathered together the most important, delightful, and profound passages from all the literature of Kabbalah in this extraordinary presentation, elegantly rendered with poetic nuances, exotic imagery, and bold innovation. Beautifully introduced with lucid analysis and vital historical information, the Essential Kabbalah offers insightful accounts of the primary aspects of Jewish mysticism, including Ein Sof, the radical transcendence of God, the Sephirot, the 10 divine attributes, and the Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God. Selections of texts are rendered with clarity and an eye for the magical. The Essential Kabbalah is a crucial and momentous contribution to the normally esoteric world of Jewish mysticism. And Daniel C. Matt has written numerous books and articles on Jewish mysticism, including Zohar, the Book of Enlightenment. He is a professor at the Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Just read the first page of the intro. A glimpse of the orchard. The Hebrew word Kabbalah means receiving, or that which has been received. On the one hand, Kabbalah refers to tradition, ancient wisdom received and treasured from the past. On the other hand, if one is truly receptive, wisdom appears spontaneously, unprecedented, taking you by surprise. The Jewish mystical tradition combines both of these elements. Its vocabulary teems with what the Zohar, the canonical text of the Kabbalah, calls new ancient words. Many of its formulations derive from traditional sources, the Bible and rabbinic literature, but with a twist. For example, the world that is coming, a traditional phrase often understood as referring to a far-off messianic era, turns into the world that is constantly coming, constantly flowing, a timeless dimension of reality available right here and now if one is receptive. The rabbinic concept of Shekinah, divine immanence, blossoms into the feminine half of God, balancing the patriarchal conceptions that dominate the Bible and the Talmud. Kabbalah retains the traditional discipline of Torah and mitzvot, commandments, but now the mitzvot have cosmic impact. Quote, the secret of fulfilling the mitzvot is the mending of all the worlds and drawing forth the emanation from above. End quote. According to Kabbalah, every human action here on earth affects the divine realm, either promoting or hindering the union of Shekinah and her partner, the Holy One, blessed be He. God is not static being, but dynamic becoming. Without human participation, God remains incomplete, unrealized. It is up to us to actualize the divine potential in the world. God needs us. And last one from Books of Interest is Lucan's Pharsalia. Dramatic Episodes of the Civil Wars, a new translation by Robert Graves. Lucan, a gifted and ambitious young Spanish poet, spent much of his short life at the Roman imperial court where his uncle Seneca, the philosopher-playwright, was a privy councillor to the young emperor Nero. Nero at first modeled his own poetic style on Lucan's and showed him great favor, but presently decided that he himself, not Lucan, was destined to be the greatest living poet, and did his best to discredit him. Lucan had been planning an epic poem about the First Civil War, to glorify Nero as the successor of the victorious Julius Caesar, but now transformed the epic into an attack on the whole principle of Caesardom, and prefaced the first book with a satirical dedication to Nero. Forbidden to publish any more poems, Lucan led a conspiracy against Nero's life, but bungled it and was forced to commit suicide, along with Seneca and other members of his family. Well aware that, in poetic craftsmanship, he could not hope to surpass his predecessor Virgil, Lucan had invented a sensationally modernistic style far better suited than the smooth Virgilian line to the riotous and confused reign of Nero. The macabre fascination of Lucan's work comes out clearly in this translation of Robert Graves, one of the great living masters of English prose. Book 1. The theme of my poem is the Civil War, which was decided on the plains of Pharsalis in Thessaly. Yet civil war is an understatement, since Pompey and Caesar, the opposing leaders, were not only fellow citizens but relatives. The whole struggle was indeed no better than one of licensed fratricide. I shall here describe how, after the breakdown of the first triumvirate, Rome turned the imperial sword against her own breast, how kinsmen faced kinsmen on the field of battle, each line of legionaries armed with identical javelins and carrying the same familiar eagle standards as its opponents, and how the civilized world reeled under this contest in iniquity. What made our forefathers embark on such an orgy of self-destruction? And why were their hated enemies permitted to enjoy the spectacle? Why was proud Parthia not first obliged to disgorge the eagles taken from Crassus, whose ghost still wandered unavenged over her plains? That should have been Rome's immediate duty. It is better indeed to reflect how much of the earth's surface, from the lands of sunrise to those of sunset, from the burning equator to the perpetually frozen seas of northernmost Scythia, could have been bought for Rome with the lives so fruitlessly squandered. We might well have brought the Chinese under our yoke, and the wild men of the Araxes, and whatever human creatures live at the sources of the Nile. Granted that Romans have an insatiable craving for war, why could we not have waited at least until all foreign nations had become subject to our laws before entering upon this criminal career? It is not as though Rome ever lacked enemies. If now in Italian cities, even some of the most venerable, the walls of empty houses still bulge outwards under broken roofs, if the streets are littered with huge stones, if no porters stand at the doorways and only a rare inhabitant wanders among the ruins, if the fields lie fallow year after year, bristling with thorns and pleading in vain for the plough, who, pray, is to blame? Not Pyrrhus, not Hannibal. Neither of those proud antagonists succeeded in wounding Rome so deeply as she wounded herself. Only when brothers fall out is the sword driven home. I like that. All right, that's all the books from Books of Interest. Next, we've got all the stuff from Big Star Books and Music. It's also in Santa Fe. First is The Strange Life of Ivan Osokin by P.D. Ouspensky, a novel. In turn of the century Russia, an embittered young man visits a magician and is given the chance to relive 12 years of his life. Aromatic smoke fills the room, and when it clears, Ivan Osokin has been returned to his stormy school days, his early manhood, his first love affairs. But what he does not know, though he soon begins to realize it, is that he will repeat the mistakes of his past. The problems of duration, of infinity, of eternal recurrence were crucial to P.D. Ouspensky's thought. This, his only novel, is a mysterious work of bewitching power, the story of a young man caught in the coils of time. Its exciting climax holds the answer to whether or not he can escape. For the wind returneth again according to his circuits. The thing that has been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. P.D. Ouspensky, mystic and mathematician, was born in Moscow in 1878. His first book, The Fourth Dimension, appeared in 1909. After publication of Tertium Organum in 1912, he made a long journey through England, France, Italy, Egypt, India, and Ceylon, quote, to seek the miraculous, unquote. He met G.I. Gurdjieff in 1915 after his return to Russia. As a result of that meeting, the development of consciousness in man became Ouspensky's chief interest. Fleeing revolutionary Russia, he arrived in Constantinople in 1920 to learn that foreign publication of Tertium Organum had made him famous and that Viscountess Rothermere wanted him to come to England. The lectures he gave in London between the wars set forth Gurdjieff's ideas and attracted such Englishmen as Aldous Huxley, Algernon Blackwood, J.D. Beresford, and A.R. Orage. During World War II, Ouspensky continued his work in America. He died in 1947. Chapter 1, The Parting. On the cinema screen, a scene at Kursk Station in Moscow. I love that opening line. A bright April day of 1902. A group of friends who came to see Zinaida Krutitsky and her mother off to the Crimea stand on the platform by the sleeping car. among them Ivan Osokin, a young man about 26. Osokin is visibly agitated, although he tries not to show it. Zenaida is talking to her brother, Mikhail, Osokin's friend, a young officer in the uniform of one of the Moscow Grenadier regiments, and two girls. Then she turns to Osokin and walks aside with him. "I'm going to miss you very much," she says. "It's a pity you cannot come with us. Though it seems to me that you don't particularly want to, otherwise you would come. You don't want to do anything for me. Your staying behind now makes all our talks ridiculous and futile. But I am tired of arguing with you. You must do as you like." Ivan Osokin becomes more and more troubled, but he tries to control himself and says with an effort, "I can't come at present, but I shall come later, I promise you. You cannot imagine how hard it is for me to stay here." All right, let's keep going. Next from Big Star is Perelandra by C.S. Lewis. It's in really good condition. 2 Adams and 1 Eve on a newborn world. Perelandra, planet of pleasure, an unearthly, misty world of strange desires, sweet smells and delicious tastes, where beasts are friendly and naked beauty is unashamed. A new Garden of Eden where the story of the oldest temptation is enacted, but in an intriguingly new way. This is book 2 of C.S. Lewis's trilogy. The preface says, "This story can be read by itself, but is also a sequel to Out of the Silent Planet, in which some account was given of Ransom's adventures in Mars, or, as its inhabitants called it, Malacandra. All the human characters in this book are purely fictional, and none of them is allegorical." Chapter 1. As I left the railway station at Worcester and set out on the 3-mile walk to Ransom's cottage, I reflected that no one on that platform could possibly guess the truth about the man I was going to visit. The flat heath which spread out before me, for the village lies all behind and to the north of the station, looked an ordinary heath. The gloomy 5 o'clock sky was such as you might see on any autumn afternoon. The few houses and the clumps of red or yellowish trees were in no way remarkable. Who could imagine that a little farther on in that quiet landscape I should meet and shake by the hand a man who had lived and eaten and drunk in a world 40 million miles distant from London, who had seen this earth from where it looks like a mere point of green fire, and who had spoken face to face with a creature whose life began before our own planet was inhabitable? For Ransom had met other things in Mars besides the Martians. I like that line. He had met the creatures called Eldila, and specially that great Eldil, who is the ruler of Mars, or, in their speech, the Oyarsa of Malacandra. The Eldila are very different from any planetary creatures. Their physical organism, if organism it can be called, is quite unlike either the human or the Martian. They do not eat, breed, breathe, or suffer natural death, and to that extent resemble thinking minerals more than they resemble anything we should recognize as an animal. Though they appear on planets and may even appear to our senses to be sometimes resident in them, the precise spatial location of an Eldil at any moment presents great problems. They themselves regard space, or deep heaven, as their true habitat, and the planets are to them not closed worlds but merely moving points, perhaps even interruptions, in what we know as the solar system, and they as the field of our bowl. At present I was going to see Ransom in answer to a wire which had said, "Come down Thursday if possible. Business." I guessed what sort of business he meant, and that was why I kept on telling myself that it would be perfectly delightful to spend a night with Ransom, and also kept on feeling that I was not enjoying the prospect as much as I ought to. It was the Eldila that were my trouble. I could just get used to the fact that Ransom had been to Mars, but to have met an Eldil, to have spoken with something whose life appeared to be practically unending. Even the journey to Mars was bad enough. A man who has been in another world does not come back unchanged. One can't put the difference into words. When the man is a friend, it may become painful. The old footing is not easy to recover. But much worse was my growing conviction that, since his return, the Eldila were not leaving him alone. Little things in his conversation, little mannerisms, accidental allusions which he made and then drew back with an awkward apology, all suggested that he was keeping strange company, that there were, well, visitors at that cottage. What a great opening. I love that. Next, Daybreak by Nietzsche, Thoughts on the Prejudices of Morality. Translated by R.J. Hollingdale, introduction by Michael Tanner. Daybreak was Nietzsche's fourth book, written in his so-called positivist period, and before the development of his doctrines of perspectivism and the Superman. Employing the aphoristic style that allowed his thought its flexibility and directness, the writing is characteristically invigorating, acute, and paradoxical. It displays his clear confidence in the power of reason, and Nietzsche's foremost concern in this book is to unmask the fictions and delusions of European values, above all of European morality. The unblinking challenges and subtle diagnoses presented here of its ingrained presuppositions and beliefs inspired and anticipated the most adventurous thought of this century from Freud to Foucault. They are, as Nietzsche says, the researches of an underground man. This entirely new translation is the only modern one available. With the introduction by Michael Tanner, it will enable this masterpiece to be fully and properly appreciated in the English-speaking world. It starts with a quote from the Rig Veda. There are so many days that have not yet broken. The preface. 1. In this book you will discover a subterranean man at work, one who tunnels in mines and undermines. You will see him, presupposing you have eyes capable of seeing this work in the depths. Going forward slowly, cautiously, gently inexorable, without betraying very much of the distress which any protracted deprivation of light and air must entail. You might even call him contented, working there in the dark. Does it not seem as though some faith were leading him on, some consolation offering him compensation? As though he perhaps desires this prolonged obscurity, desires to be incomprehensible, concealed, enigmatic, because he knows that he will thereby also acquire his own morning, his own redemption, his own daybreak? He will return, that is certain. Do not ask him what he is looking for down there. He will tell you himself of his own accord, this seeming Trophonius and subterranean, as soon as he has become a man again. Being silent is something one completely unlearns if, like him, one has been for so long a solitary mole. Nietzsche's writing is always so incredible, it just grabs you, so passionate. 2. And indeed, my patient friends, I shall now tell you what I was after down there, here in this late preface, which could easily have become a funeral oration, for I have returned and, believe it or not, returned safe and sound. Do not think for a moment that I intend to invite you to the same hazardous enterprise, or even only to the same solitude, for he who proceeds on his own path in this fashion encounters no one. That is inherent in proceeding on one's own path. No one comes along to help him. All the perils, accidents, malice, and bad weather which assail him he has to tackle by himself, for his path is his alone, as is, of course, the bitterness and occasional ill humor he feels at this his alone, among which is included, for instance, the knowledge that even his friends are unable to divine where he is or whither he is going, that they will sometimes ask themselves, what? Is he going at all? Does he still have a path? At that time I undertook something not everyone may undertake. I descended into the depths. I tunneled into the foundations. I commenced an investigation and digging out of an ancient faith, one upon which we philosophers have for a couple of millennia been accustomed to build as if upon the firmest of all foundations, and have continued to do so, even though every building hitherto erected on them has fallen down. I commenced to undermine our faith in morality. But you do not understand me? All right, next. The 7 Days of the Heart by Ibn Arabī. Prayers for the Nights and Days of the Week. Translated by Pablo Beneto and Stephen Hertenstein. How can I know you when you are the inwardly hidden who is not known? How can I not know you when you are the outwardly manifest, making yourself known to me in everything? From the Sunday Morning Prayer. Ibn Arabī, who lived from 1165 to 1240, has long been known as a great spiritual master. His many works of prose and poetry are beginning to be more accessible in translation in Western languages. They possess the remarkable quality of being able to speak to people of all walks of life and belief, across the apparent barriers of many centuries and different cultures. Despite this growing interest, the prayers that are attributed to him remain little known. They provide a most precious glimpse into the real practice of the mystical life within the Sufi tradition. This is the first time that any of Ibn Arabi's prayers have been published in another language. This particular collection is one of the most beautiful, having been revered in the Islamic world for centuries. There are 14 prayers, one for each night and day of the week. Not only are they full of the most astonishing expressions of contemplation and devotion to God, they also include an unparalleled depth of knowledge of union, tawhid. As the translators show in their introduction, the very structure of the prayers is a mode of contemplation, since for Ibn Arabi, the weekly cycle itself is sacred. This is a unique spiritual masterpiece made available for the first time to an English readership. And it's Monday today, so let me go to Monday evening. Page 33. The Monday Eve Prayer. In the name of God, the all-compassionate and most merciful. O my God, your knowledge embraces all that is knowable. Your awareness encompasses the interior meaning of all that is understandable. You are sanctified in your exaltedness from all that is blamable. The spiritual aspirations ascend to you, and the words soar to you. You are the supremely exalted in your eminence, so that the closest we can reach in our ascension to you is condescension on your part. You are the most glorious in your exaltedness, so that the noblest of our qualities with regard to you is self-abasement. You have manifested in the interior and exterior of everything. You are permanent before every beginning and after every ending. Glory be to you. There is no God but you. The foreheads prostrate before your magnificence, and the lips are delighted by your remembrance. I ask of you, by your magnificent name, to whom is elevated everyone who rises up towards you, and from whom comes the great welcome for all who are received by you, to grant me a heart in which the sublime aspirations request of me and the disdainful souls are led to me. I ask of you, O my Lord, that you let your condescension be a ladder by which I may rise to you, and that you make my lowliness and abasement the means by which I may ascend to you. Envelop me in the protective covering of your light, by which you unveil for me everything that is veiled, and by which you conceal me from all the envious and the deluded. Grant me a character by which I embrace all that is created, and by which I establish all that is real, just as you have embraced everything in compassion and knowledge. There is no God but you, O living one, O self-subsisting one. O my Lord, instruct me with the subtle benevolence of your lordliness, as one who is conscious of being in total need of you should be instructed, as one who never claims to be independent of you. Watch over me with the eye of your providence, protecting me from all the knocks that may befall me, or anything that may afflict me or cause me to be troubled at any moment or in any perception, or that may inscribe one of the lines upon the tablet of my own will. Provide me with the ease of intimacy with you, and raise me to the station of closeness to you. Revive my spirit with your remembrance, and draw me on, now with hopeful longing for you, and now with reverent fear of you. Restore to me the cloak of satisfaction, and bring me to the wellsprings of the welcome. Grant me compassion from you, re-establishing harmony in my disorder, perfecting where I am lacking, rectifying where I am deviating, restraining me when I am astray, and guiding me when I am perplexed. Indeed, you are Lord of everything, and its instructor. You mercify the essences of all beings, and you elevate the degrees. Your closeness is the joy of the spirits, and the perfumed sweetness of rejoicing, the epitome of true prosperity, and the repose of all those who are at ease. May you be blessed, Lord of lords, liberator of slaves, lifter of suffering. You embrace everything in compassion and in knowledge. You forgive wrongdoing with loving tenderness and clemency. You are the forgiving, the merciful, the clement, the all-knowing, the high, the magnificent. And may the blessing of God be upon our Master, Muhammad, and upon all his family and companions. And praise be to God, Lord of the universes. That's it for Ibn Arabi and all the books that I got from Big Star this time around. And finally, we have the books that I got from op.cit. It's probably my favorite store in Santa Fe, at least. And I'll start with the books I got from the op.cit in Taos, because I went to both of them. So this is Painting of India from the Treasures of Asia series, published by Skira. These books are really cool. You can get them for, about $20 online. So if you like this sort of thing, it's really high quality. This book may claim to be the first history of Indian painting to incorporate the enormous progress made by research during the past 20 years. It covers firstly the wall painting of the classical period of Indian art from the 2nd to the 16th century, the Buddhist caves of Ajanta, which contained the greatest series of wall paintings in Asia, the less famous but extensive groups at Badami, Bagh, and Ellora, the wonderful frescoes in the Raja Raja Temple of Tanjore. Though the classical style was overwhelmed in North India and the Deccan by the Islamic invasions of the 13th and 14th centuries, it continued to develop in the comparative security of South India, where the paintings at Lipakshi and in the palaces of Travancore retain the decorative quality and scale of earlier work. Until the arrival of the Mughals in the 16th century, Islam had contributed little to the growth of a new tradition. But from about 1550 to 1650, there arose a style of miniature painting based on elements drawn from India, Persia, and Europe, an eclecticism satisfying and fruitful, which presented the contemporary scene and a magnificent court with an effortless technique and brilliant color. At the same time, the Islamic kingdoms of the Deccan were producing a painting no less splendid and with an added refinement and poetry. Meanwhile, in remoter regions of North India, there occurred a renaissance of painting which lasted into the 19th century. Here the subjects are not so much the personality of the ruler or the splendor of the court as the warmth and romance of native themes. Towards the end of the 17th century, the same impulse was felt in the small hill states of the western Himalayas, giving rise to numerous variations on the two loving styles commonly known as Basoli and Kangra, the one strong and passionate, the other delicate and feminine. Treasures of Asia, collected, planned, and directed by Albert Skira. Yeah, and all of the paintings are tipped in plates, which I learned means something like this, where they print it out on an even nicer type of paper and then put them in to the book. So there's hundreds of these throughout the whole book. It's really cool. Text by Douglas Barrett and Basil Gray, Assistant Curator and Curator of Oriental Studies at the British Museum. And this is from 1963. I'll just read this first page. The long history of Indian art falls naturally into two periods. The earlier, which may be called the classical period, begins with the official adoption of Buddhism by the Emperor Asoka in the 3rd century BC and ends with the invasion and occupation by Muslim powers of North India in the 13th and of the Deccan in the 14th century. Orissa and South India alone succeeded in fighting off the invaders. In these intact and powerful provinces, the classical period was prolonged into the 16th and 17th centuries. During this period, the unique character of the Indian genius found expression in the creation of a complex society, in religion and metaphysical speculation, and in literature and music, no less than in the visual arts. The classical period was Hindu, the word being used not in any exclusive sectarian sense, for the two religions which stemmed from it, Buddhism and Jainism, shared in every development equally with apparent faith, but to express a mode of thought, a way of life, and a form of social relationship and organization. The classical culture developed in a great, continuous, and uninterrupted sweep, of which a fair, if rough, and much briefer parallel would be the Christian culture of medieval Europe. Invasions there were, but they did not deflect India from her steady movement in the direction of her choice, though they may have accentuated regional differences in style, at least in North India. From its inception, the classical style had been naturalistic, the ideal forms of the Indian imagination being firmly based on those of nature. By the 10th century, art in North India and the Deccan had reached a stage of its development in which the increasing elaboration and scale of design involved the use of sculpture primarily as decorative units to give plastic life to the surface of the temple. An image of the 10th to the 12th century which looks right in its architectural setting is a perfectly placed accent in a large composition, is less satisfying and valid than an earlier image when viewed as a fragment. This slow movement away from naturalism as a means of expression is apparent also in painting, where the line which had been inflected to produce the volumes of ideal natural forms began tentatively to invent rules of its own. Though personal taste may prefer this phase in the life of a style, it is a shifting of emphasis familiar when a particular culture is beginning to lose its intensity and sureness of vision. If the process is uninterrupted, the forms of the style which once had real content become decorative gestures which, vivacious in the hands of an artist of quality, achieve real vitality rarely. This process is interminable in a society where craftsmen are organized in families and guilds and are trained by precept and pattern book. The only source of novelty open to such a period is archaism, the attempt to recreate the forms without reliving the experience of one or several earlier phases of the style. This is the history of South Indian art from the 17th to the 19th centuries. To regenerate the European tradition when it becomes difficult to imagine a real development within the framework of medieval culture and society, the Southern Renaissance intervened. A break, not abrupt or complete, but clear. The Muslim invaders provided the break at a similar stage in the art of North India and the Deccan. So yeah, these plates are just so cool. I love how this book is set up. It's just filled with beautiful pieces. Fun to flip through. Anyway, I'll keep moving. Next we have Documents Relating to the Sentimental Agents in the Volian Empire by Doris Lessing. And this is the 5th book in Lessing's space fiction series called Canopus and Argos, Archives. And Shikasta, I read it in college, and it is one of those books that really stuck with me. I've never read anything like it, except for maybe something like Last and First Men by Stapleton. It just covers billions of years, and I don't think she's very well known for this series, but I really love it. Okay, let's keep going. In the previous Canopus novels, Doris Lessing has proffered her extraordinarily powerful vision of humankind by combining historical analogy and allegory, myth, and augury. With this new volume, in the tradition of Voltaire and Swift, she adds social and political satire to her armory. This 5th book brings us to the Volian Empire, small, in rapid decline, and a vortex of chaos, as the empires of Sirius and Shamat vie for its control with their favorite weapons, rhetoric and false sentiment. Canopus, alone in its knowledge of the unchangeable nature of history and, thus, of the outcome of this struggle, keeps agents on hand to covertly help the Volians survive the turmoil. But there are unseasoned Canopian agents in Volian who prove to be less than impervious to the temptations at hand. Incent, a young agent of some promise, succumbs to a, quote, stubborn condition of undulant rhetoric, end quote, after years of sporadic attacks of simple rhetoric. Agent Clorathy is sent to Volian to supervise him and make sure that he eventually realizes the madness and the hollow promise of the words that now have him hypnotized. The book is comprised of Clorathy's reports to his superior, and, though Clorathy himself has occasional bouts of schematis, his stays in restorative detention always bring him around, his largely disinterested account of Incent's rhetoric-induced delusion and of the Volians' rhetoric-induced downfall allows us to see how man can be seduced by his own sentimentality, his love of grand ideas which signify little but the sound of the words that announce them, and gives us, as well, a high-spirited and farcical treatment of everything from petty bureaucracy to the next good food source, rocknosh. Documents relating to the sentimental agents in the Volian Empire is an indictment of the ways in which man misuses his power of speech and the power of speeches, and of his own self-flattering sentiments about emotion. But the indictment is tempered and enhanced by the brilliantly acute insight into human behavior that Doris Lessing brings to all her work, and by a broad humor that adds a new dimension to her Canopus series. Doris Lessing was born of British parents in Persia in 1919 and moved with her family to southern Rhodesia when she was 5 years old. She went to England in 1949 and has lived there ever since. She is/was the author of more than 20 books, novels, stories, reportage, poems, and plays. She might have won the Nobel Prize in Literature. I can't remember. Chloranthy, from Independent Planet Volian to Johor on Canopus. I requested leave from service on Shikasta. I find myself on a planet whose dominant feature is the same as Shikasta's. Very well. I will stick it out for this term of duty, but I hereby give notice, formally, that I am applying to be sent, when I'm finished here, to a planet as backward as you like, as challenging as you like, but not one whose populations seem permanently afflicted by self-destructive dementia. Now for my initial report. I have been here for 5 years, and can confirm recent reports that our agent Incent did succumb to an attack of rhetoric. Not, after all, unknown, and not, as I may remind you, always unwelcome, if regarded as an inoculation against worse, but unfortunately he did not recover, and suffers still from a stubborn condition of undulant rhetoric. It was 10 years ago that he fell to the wiles of Shamat, reporting his reactions in a letter which I attach herewith. Please see that it reaches the archives. Chloranthy, I am taking the liberty of writing to you direct instead of to the Colonial Office because of our meeting when I came home to Canopus on leave last year, and you said you had been assigned my supervision. I feel that what I want to ask is so important it goes beyond my little personal problems, but on the other hand, I have no actual administrative problems as such to report. To come to the point, I met someone on this planet's second planet, Voyandesta, when I was there because of the riots, which necessitated the withdrawal of Volyan's imperial forces. I do not have to tell you that all through my training as colonial servant, and during my briefing session, the dangers of Shamat were drummed into me, and everyone else. But imagine my surprise after the most inspiring evening of my whole life when I found that my companion was from Shamat. When he said he was Krolgul of Shamat, I thought he was joking. I was awake all night in torment, Chloranthy. I can't remember ever spending such an awful night. Then I met him again by chance in the courts as the rebels were being sentenced, and I saw a man of such compassion, such warmth of heart, such sensitivity to others' sufferings. This was the terrible Shamat, this wonderful being who wept as the rebels were led out to execution. I spent the next weeks with him. I was given a view of, first, Volyan, and then of the Volyan Empire. I put it in inverted commas, as is our Canopian way, but does this not show arrogance on our part? The Volyan Empire, consisting of the 2 moons Volyanadna and Volyandesta, and 2 neighboring planets, Macon and Sloven in Volyan terminology, the Syrian planets PE70 and PE71, hardly stands comparison with our rule, or that of the Syrian Empire, but from their point of view it is something, an achievement. I was quite ashamed to see Krolgul's ironic but kind smile when I spoke of the Volyan Empire with what I am afraid I now see as something not far from contempt. And it was not only of Volyan affairs, but of Sirius and ourselves as well that I was introduced to a very different view. So different there was a point when I realized, and with what shock and distress I hardly dare to say, that my attitude was no longer consistent with that of a loyal servant of Canopus. I am prepared to offer my resignation. What shall I do? Your always grateful pupil, Incent. Yeah, she always has really great frames for her stories. I've only read the space fiction, but it's always interesting. It's not a straightforward narrative. Finally, from the Taos op.cit, I got Authority by Jeff Vandermeer, the only new book I bought. This is the sequel to Annihilation, which is a really fun one. After 30 years, the only human engagement with Area X, a seemingly malevolent landscape surrounded by an invisible border and mysteriously wiped clean of all signs of civilization, has been a series of expeditions overseen by government agencies so secret it has almost been forgotten. The Southern Reach. Following the tumultuous 12th expedition chronicled in Annihilation, the agency is in complete disarray. John Rodriguez, aka Control, is the Southern Reach's newly appointed head. Working with a distrustful but desperate team, a series of frustrating interrogations, a cache of hidden notes, and hours of profoundly troubling video footage, Control begins to penetrate the secrets of Area X. But with each discovery, he must confront disturbing truths about himself and the agency he's pledged to serve. In Authority, the second volume of Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy, Area X's most disturbing questions are answered, but the answers are far from reassuring. Jeff Vandermeer is an award-winning novelist and editor. His fiction has been translated into 20 languages and has appeared in the Library of America's American Fantastic Tales and multiple years' best anthologies. He grew up in the Fiji Islands and now lives in Tallahassee, Florida, with his wife. Let's see what the first page is like. Incantations. 000. In Control's dreams it is early morning, the sky deep blue with just a twinge of light. He is staring from a cliff down into an abyss, a bay, a cove. It always changes. He can see for miles into the still water. He can see ocean behemoths gliding there, like submarines or bell-shaped orchids on the wide hulls of ships, silent, ever-moving, the size of them conveying such a sense of power that he can feel the havoc of their passage even from so far above. He stares for hours at the shapes, the movements, listening to the whispers echoing up to him, and then he falls. Slowly, too slowly, he falls soundlessly into the dark water, without splash or ripple, and keeps falling. Sometimes this happens while he is awake, and if he hasn't been paying enough attention, and then he silently recites his own name until the real world returns to him. Like that first page for sure. Now, we have the books from op.cit and Santa Fe. Action versus Contemplation, Why an Ancient Debate Still Matters. Jennifer Summit and Blakey Vermeule. It is truly an ancient debate. Is it better to be active or contemplative? To do or to think? To make an impact or to understand the world more deeply? Aristotle argued for contemplation as the highest state of human flourishing, but it was through action that his student Alexander the Great conquered the known world. Centuries later, this choice underlies a surprising number of the questions we face in contemporary life. Should students study the humanities or train for a job? Should adults work for money or for meaning? And in tumultuous times, should any of us sit on the sidelines pondering great books or throw ourselves into protests and petition drives? With Action versus Contemplation, Jennifer Summit and Blakey Vermeule address the question in a refreshingly unexpected way by refusing to take sides. Rather, they argue for a rethinking of the very opposition. The active and the contemplative can, and should, be vibrantly alive in each of us, fused rather than sundered. Writing in a personable, accessible style, Summit and Vermeule guide readers through the long history of this debate, from Plato to Pixar, drawing connections to the questions and problems of today. Rather than playing one against the other, they argue, we can discover how the two nourish, invigorate, and give meaning to each other. This is not a self-help book. Instead, it is something better. A case for the richness of a life that embraces action and contemplation, company and solitude, living in the moment and planning for the future. Which is better? Readers of this book will discover the answer, both. Jennifer Summit is Interim Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at San Francisco State University and the author of Memories Library, Medieval Books in Early Modern England, and Lost Property, The Woman Writer in English Literary History from 1380 to 1589. Blakey Vermeule is professor of English at Stanford University and the author of The Party of Humanity, Writing Moral Psychology in 18th Century Britain, and Why Do We Care About Literary Characters? Chapter 1, From Action and Contemplation to Stress and Relaxation. The phenomenon of stress among young people is not new, but it appears to be ratcheting up, as is the attention given to it. In our region of Northern California, a recent cluster of high school suicides has prompted a new level of urgency and a determination to understand teenagers' less visible but more pervasive forms of desperation. Parents and schools are beginning to re-examine their approaches, scaling back homework and curricular activities, and encouraging teens to practice mindfulness, meditation, and yoga as stress relievers. These responses, however positive, reflect a widely held assumption that stress is a consequence of overscheduling and increased pressure. Reduce the pressure and unpack the schedule, it holds, and stress will dissipate. But where this assumption takes the problem to be one of excess, too much homework, pressure, scheduling, distraction, others perceive a larger problem of absence. The biggest problem growing up today is not actually stress, observes William Dannon, professor of education at Stanford. It's meaninglessness. As Damon argues in his 2008 book, The Path to Purpose, we could expect more young people to thrive if, during the years of strenuous effort and high achievement, they had found purposes that went deeper than the grades and awards expected of them. Purposelessness, like stress, he points out, is not confined to the affluent, those most likely to overschedule their children with expensive activities and to buy books that tell them not to, but afflicts all income levels, and, like stress, it requires a remedy more intensive than relaxation. Okay, next. Introduction to Religious Philosophy by McGregor. And this is just, I had to buy this. I don't know, something about the quality and how the smell and the subject matter. Part 1. What is religion? Tentative definition. Religion is commitment to a kind or quality of life that purports to recognize a source beyond itself, usually but not necessarily called God, and that issues in recognizable fruits in human conduct, e.g., law, morality, culture, e.g., art, poetry, and thought, e.g., philosophy. This is a convenient, tentative definition of religion for working purposes. The stricter definition must come as a result of our study, rather than at the beginning of it, for it requires the more technical vocabulary that we shall only gradually acquire as our study proceeds. But already we can deduce certain consequences. For instance, religion is not necessarily good or bad. It may be either. The worship of a dictator, such as Hitler, in a totalitarian state, such as the Germany of the late 30s, is thoroughly religious in character, but most readers will very readily agree that it is an undesirable religion. Nevertheless, no one who is familiar with the outlook and setup of such movements can fail to recognize that they are exceedingly lively, that they may recognize a source beyond themselves, e.g., the soul of the master race, and that they issue in recognizable fruits in human conduct, e.g., anti-Semitic laws, culture, e.g., movies glorifying the dictator and his achievements, and even thought, e.g., the intellectual defense or systematization of the principles of the movement by a philosopher such as Rosenberg in Hitler's Germany. On the other hand, while a few persons would seek to argue that all religion is undesirable, most people would wish to maintain that, in contrast to the sort of religion we have been considering, the religion of, say, Amos or Francis of Assisi or Abraham Lincoln or John Wesley is, to say the very least, preferable. Many, of course, would wish to say far more than this, and would affirm with the greatest conviction that one or other of the religions expressed in the lives of men such as Wesley and Lincoln was the most valuable treasure known to humanity. The point is that, while there might be all kinds of judgments on the value of religions in general, or of this or that religion in particular, we are not now concerning ourselves with any of these judgments, but only with establishing at the outset the finding that religions, as we encounter them in actual experience, i.e., empirically, need not be good or bad, and may be either the one or the other. And next we have St. Anselm's Proslogion, translated and introduced by M.J. Charlesworth. And this argument always sort of stuck with me. I think it's the way he puts it is, God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. And I always really liked that in its simplicity and catch-all sort of nature. In the Proslogion, St. Anselm presents a philosophical argument for the existence of God that is intended to have validity for the atheist as well as for the believer. Anselm's proof, known since the time of Kant as the ontological argument for the existence of God, has played an important role in the history of philosophy and has been incorporated in various forms into the systems of Descartes, Leibniz, Hegel, and others. Included in this edition of St. Anselm's Proslogion are Gaunilo's A Reply on Behalf of the Fool and St. Anselm's The Author's Reply to Gaunilo. All three works are given in the original Latin with English translation on facing pages. Professor Charlesworth provides in his introduction a helpful discussion of the context of the Proslogion in the theological tradition and in Anselm's own thought and writing. His commentary exhibits a careful analysis of Anselm's progression of thought and illuminates his argument by comparing it with the later ontological argument of Descartes. Professor Charlesworth deals critically with various interpretations of the Proslogion by later theologians, notably Aquinas and Karl Barth. Oh, it's 102. I think I want to read the beginning of the first chapter more than the preface. Arousing of the mind to the contemplation of God. Come now, insignificant man, fly for a moment from your affairs, escape for a little while from the tumult of your thoughts. Put aside now your weighty cares and leave your wearisome toils. Abandon yourself for a little to God, and rest for a little in Him. Enter into the inner chamber of your soul, shut out everything save God and what can be of help in your quest for Him, and having locked the door, seek Him out. Speak now, my whole heart, speak now to God. I seek your countenance, O Lord, your countenance I seek. Come then, Lord my God, teach my heart where and how to seek you, where and how to find you. Lord, if you are not present here, where, since you are absent, shall I look for you? On the other hand, if you are everywhere, why then, since you are present, do I not see you? But surely you dwell in light inaccessible. And where is this inaccessible light? Or how can I approach the inaccessible light? Or who shall lead me and take me into it, that I may see you in it? Again, by what signs, under what aspect, shall I seek you? Never have I seen you, Lord my God. I do not know your face. What shall he do, Most High Lord? What shall this exile do, far away from you as he is? What shall your servant do, tormented by love of you, and yet cast off far from your face? He yearns to see you, and your countenance is too far away from him. He desires to come close to you, and your dwelling place is inaccessible. He longs to find you, and does not know where you are. He is eager to seek you out, and he does not know your countenance. Lord, you are my God and my Lord, and never have I seen you. You have created me and recreated me, and you have given me all the good things I possess, and still I do not know you. In fine, I was made in order to see you, and I have not yet accomplished what I was made for. I love that first page. Wow. Amazing. Next is this awesome old Penguin Classics version of Don Quixote. And this is probably my favorite era of Penguin Classics. No barcode, no ISBN, the full artwork on the cover. Anyway, and they always smell amazing. Something about the way these Penguin Classics books deteriorate just smells incredible. This is one of my favorite types of book right here. And I read some of this, and it's so funny. I need to come back to it. It feels really modern. 25 or 31, let's see. Yeah, I'll read the beginning of this of the prologue because it's a great framing device where he's, talking about the story itself. Anyway, it's longer than I can read here, but if you like interesting framing devices, I would check this out. Actually, I want to read the beginning of the story. So if you like interesting framing devices, check this out, but I'm going to go to the beginning of the narrative. Chapter 1, which treats of the quality and way of life of the famous knight Don Quixote de la Mancha. In a certain village in La Mancha, which I do not wish to name, there lived not long ago a gentleman, one of those who have always a lance in the rack, an ancient shield, a lean hack, and a greyhound for coursing. Amazing first sentence. His habitual diet consisted of a stew, more beef than mutton, of hash most nights, boiled bones on Saturdays, lentils on Fridays, and a young pigeon as a Sunday treat, and on this he spent 3/4 of his income. The rest of it went on a fine cloth doublet, velvet breeches and slippers for holidays, and a homespun suit of the best in which he decked himself on weekdays. His household consisted of a housekeeper of rather more than 40, a niece not yet 20, and a lad for the field and market, who saddled his horse and wielded the pruning hook. Our gentleman was verging on 50, of tough constitution, lean-bodied, thin-faced, a great early riser and a lover of hunting. They say that his surname was Quijada, or Quesada, for there is some difference of opinion amongst authors on this point. However, by very reasonable conjecture, we may take it that he was called Quejana, but this does not much concern our story, enough that we do not depart by so much as an inch from the truth in the telling of it. The reader must know, then, that this gentleman, in the times when he had nothing to do, as was the case for most of the year, gave himself up to the reading of books of knight-errantry, which he loved and enjoyed so much that he almost completely forgot his hunting and even the care of his estate. So odd and foolish, indeed, did he grow on this subject, that he sold many acres of corner land to buy these books of chivalry to read, and in this way brought home every one he could get. And of them all he considered none so good as the works of the famous Feliciano da Silva, for his brilliant style and those complicated sentences seemed to him very pearls, especially when he came upon those love passages and challenges frequently written in the manner of, quote, "The reason for the unreason, with which you treat my reason, so weakens my reason, that with reason I complain of your beauty." End quote. And also when he read, quote, "The high heavens that with their stars divinely fortify you in your divinity and make you deserving of the desert that your greatness deserves." End quote. These writings drove the poor knight out of his wits, and he passed sleepless nights trying to understand them and disentangle their meaning, though Aristotle himself would never have unraveled or understood them, even if he had been resurrected for that sole purpose. He did not much like the wounds that Sir Belianus gave and received, for he imagined that his face and his whole body must have been covered with scars and marks, however skillful the surgeons who tended him. But, for all that, he admired the author for ending his book with the promise to continue with that interminable adventure, and often the desire seized him to take up the pen himself and write the promised sequel for him. No doubt he would have done so, and perhaps successfully, if other greater and more persistent preoccupations had not prevented him. All right, and finally, the last book we have is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, the first book in the Earthsea series. Gaunt, the island famous for wizards, Ged, the young wizard of the isles. In his day Ged, called the Sparrowhawk, became both dragon lord and archmage. His story is told in many songs, but this is the haunting tale of a proud, lonely boy in the time before his fame. It is a tale of wizards, dragons, and shadows played out in Earthsea, a world of numberless islands and vast oceans where mages, looking for adventure, wandered, working magic. The Earthsea Trilogy. This trio of novels, a recognized classic of high fantasy, has been compared with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories. The present volume, A Wizard of Earthsea, is the first in the series and is followed by The Tombs of Atuan and The Farthest Shore. There may be more than 3. I think there are. Maybe not. The Great Spell. The words of the enchantment hissed and mumbled on Ged's lips, and then he cried aloud, El Ferran! Again he cried the name, and the third time. The shapeless mass of darkness split apart. It sundered, and a pale spindle of light gleamed between his open arms. In the oval of light there moved a human shape, a tall woman, beautiful and sorrowful and full of fear. Only for a moment did the spirit glimmer there. Then the oval grew bright, and through it blazed a terrible brightness, and through that breach clambered something like a clot of black shadow, quick and hideous, and it leaped straight out at Ged's face. Cool map. I love a fantasy map. Only in silence the word, only in dark the light, only in dying life, bright the hawk's flight on the empty sky. The creation of Ea. Chapter 1, Warriors in the Mist. The island of Gaunt, a single mountain that lifts its peak a mile above the storm-racked Northeast Sea, is a land famous for wizards. From the towns in its high valleys and the ports on its dark, narrow bays, many a Gauntishman has gone forth to serve the lords of the archipelago in their cities as wizard or mage, or, looking for adventure, to wander working magic from isle to isle of all Earthsea. Of these some say the greatest, and surely the greatest voyager, was the man called Sparrowhawk, who in his day became both dragon lord and archmage. His life is told of in the Deed of Ged, and in many songs, but this is a tale of the time before his fame, before the songs were made. It's beautiful. He was born in a lonely village called 10 Alders, high on the mountain at the head of the northward vale. Below the village, the pastures and ploughlands of the vale slope downward level below level towards the sea, and other towns lie on the bends of the river Ar. Above the village only forest rises ridge behind ridge to the stone and snow of the heights. Love that intro. Fantastic. Anyway, if you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed going through these books with me, and hopefully I introduced you to something new. If this is something you liked, please like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. And until next time, happy reading.